People versus Barry is filled with notions of conflict and violence. Barry and his wife Rachel were married only a short time. Their relationship was problematic from the beginning. She left for Israel shortly after they were married, and when she returned, she taunted him with an affair that she had had, and with the idea that she was going to leave him. Perhaps when you read the case, you may have speculated about why they got married. Sometimes over the years, students offer the idea that this was an arranged marriage between an older man, a U.S. citizen, and a younger girl, not a U.S. citizen, so that she could get a green card. Is that what you thought? Similar in facts to Gerard, yes, conflicted relationship between a husband and wife. But notice, in the opinion, unlike Gerard, defendant here is called Barry, not Steve, although both cases call the victim by their first name. What's not speculation is the abuse she suffered before her death. In fact, this is classic domestic abuse. When she comes back from Israel, she taunts defendant with an affair she had and with the idea she was going to leave him, and what does he do? He chokes her into unconsciousness. She calls him afterward and says there's a warrant out for his arrest because she reported the incident. I want to freeze it there for a moment. This kind of triggering incident, police involvement, or the abused party leaving the relationship often creates this kind of escalation we see in domestic violence cases. Indeed, stats tell us that estrangement is the single most important factor that triggers deathly violence by the abuser, and that's what we have here. The jury convicted Barry of murder 1. Of course, it didn't have the benefit of voluntary manslaughter instruction. The judge had rejected it because he was following the traditional restrictive view of what constitutes adequate provocation, element number 3 for voluntary manslaughter. And here the judge said, I can't even let the jury entertain voluntary manslaughter as a possibility. So, Barry was convicted of murder 1. Do you think the facts support the jury verdict of murder 1? What are those facts that could support premeditation? It is really crazy to me, but the facts as outlined in this opinion demonstrate classic premeditation. Did you spot them? First of all, there's Barry roaming around their apartment, thinking about Rachel, stewing, steaming. 20 hours of hanging out in that apartment, often in the dark, getting angrier and angrier. I can't help but think about the clip from a movie long ago, Fatal Attraction, when Glenn Close is in her apartment, sitting on the floor, turning the light on and off, as she thinks about killing Michael Douglas. Everyone watching that movie knew what she was thinking. And sure enough, she went off to kill. And that is what prosecution will argue that Barry was considering, that he was reflecting on the intent to kill. But we have even more to show premeditation, and this is from defendant's own words. We know that Rachel came back to the apartment. That's where the confrontation occurred. And now look at the dialogue, which we know must be true because it came from defendant. She says to him, "Are you here to kill me?" He says, "Yes." Then he changes his mind and says, "No." Then yes, and then finally, "I want to talk." When she screams, he grabs the telephone cord and strangles her. Even in a jurisdiction like Bingham, that came out and said strangling alone can't be sufficient evidence of premeditation, I think the Bingham court would have concluded that there was evidence of premeditation here. Yes, no, yes, reflecting on the intent to kill is obvious from that dialogue. Barry's argument is that it shouldn't be premeditated murder. It shouldn't even be murder 2, a homicide with malice. He wants to offer the affirmative defense of voluntary manslaughter. He's basically saying that Rachel pushed him to kill her, with her words and with her actions. I hate saying this, but it's a kind of the victim deserved it defense. Terrible way to say it, because nobody deserves to die for these kinds of words. But that's how the heat of passion doctrine ends up being framed. Barry is saying Rachel pushed me with her on and off again protestations of love of him. She pushed me, she played me, and she used me. And that inflamed my passions. And who comes in to help paint this negative picture of Rachel? You guessed it. You saw it in the opinion. It's another psychiatrist. Did it remind you of the Gerard case where Dr. Goldman testified about Joyce? Here in Barry, it's Dr. Blinder who's testifying that Rachel was suicidal and depressed. And because of her suicidal tendency, she stayed in this dangerous situation with Barry, provoking him. Just as we discussed in Gerard, Dr. Blinder never met Rachel. These are all theories espoused by Dr. Blinder to paint a narrative of a very difficult victim who pushed on Barry until his passions were so inflamed, he formed the intent to kill her, and he killed her. Because this is an appeal, it's about a question of law as to whether this case can be voluntary manslaughter. The court had to take a stand. Will Barry be entitled to a jury instruction on voluntary manslaughter? Is the provocation he suffered here adequate as a matter of law? To this court, the answer is yes. It says that there is no specific type of provocation that must be met. No list, no traditional view of those list of factors. And furthermore, it need not even be one act per se. It can be acts that build up over time to culminate into adequate provocation. The court says this is how human nature works. It's never necessarily about a specific one-time incident. That's a direct swipe at the traditional view, which requires one factor from the prescribed list. And nothing outside of that list is allowed. In fact, the Barry Court goes even further. It says that verbal provocation may be sufficient grounds to receive a manslaughter instruction. Certainly it could be added in with the other facts. Here, defendant had a 2-week intense period of long provocatory conduct that could arouse a passion of jealousy, pain, sexual rage that would move an ordinary person to kill. The court also throws in that defendant himself demonstrated that he was in this uncontrollable heat of passion when he killed Rachel. That's element number 2.